Hey everybody, welcome back to another Cloud Native Short Take at RxM. Today we're going to take a look at the K8s Troubleshooting module. This module covers tools in cluster and workload troubleshooting. Also takes a look at troubleshooting workflows and some of the different steps in the process of workflow problem resolution. And then we also take a look at a lot of the different failure modes in the Kubernetes cluster components. We're going to begin by jumping over to GitHub. And in GitHub, there is an rx-m org. And if you go to the github.com/rx-m org, you're going to see a pinned repo, BustaKube. And the idea behind this repo is to give you a bunch of different troubleshooting scenarios. And so the BustaKube repo gives you a whole bunch of different Kubernetes specifications in YAML file format that have something wrong with them. And when you apply them to the cluster, it creates a problem, and then you need to sort of sort that out. That's the idea. And so in the lab, we spend some time using some of these BustaKube examples. And they're kind of cool the way they're laid out. Let's take a look at, for example, workload 1 here. You have a README that you see down here that explains how to use that particular BustaKube problem. And then there's a problem YAML. So you don't want to necessarily look at this YAML. Some of them in the README, they may ask you to read the YAML and then apply it. But most of the time, you want to sort of just apply it, because a lot of times something else has created that file, right? A CI/CD pipeline has created that file, or the result of a Helm template. And now all of a sudden, you've got a workload that's running and doesn't work, and you're trying to figure out what's happening. So the idea is to read the README, follow the instructions, and then see if you can solve the problem. And if you get stuck, the solution.markdown has the example solution in it. And of course, there's 50 million ways to solve problems in Kubernetes quite often. So it may not be the only solution, and yours may be just as good or even better. So let's give this a try. I'm just going to drop this in and run it. And it says, okay, pod debug -pod 1 created. All right. Is it really? Right. Well, let's find out, right? One of the first things you might do to just poke your head around and see what's happening is kubectl get pod. And so I can see, there's a dead giveaway right here. I have 0 out of 1 containers running in that pod. So that's a problem. And I can see that I have an init status error image pull. So we couldn't even get started because the image failed to pull. There could be lots of reasons, but this is one of the first things that you're probably ever going to run into when you start working with Kubernetes. You're going to put a typo in the image, right? And so when Kubernetes looks at your spec, it can tell if you're providing a key that's not in the Kubernetes specification, and it can throw that out as an error. But when you're supposed to supply an image, that could be anything. There's no way for Kubernetes to really know if that image is valid until it actually tries to pull it. And as you can see here, we got the error at that point. And so this is tricky, right? If you execute a command and it says created, you sort of think everything's good, but that's not the case, because Kubernetes has a lot of asynchronous parts that operate behind the scenes. So let's take a look at a couple of ways that we could try to ferret out the problem. Number one, we could say kubectl and get this particular pod, right? And this is debug pod 1, I believe. Yeah. So let's take a look at that. And we're going to output it as a YAML. So we really just want to dump everything about it. There's a lot of benefit to looking at the full YAML dump of anything in Kubernetes. You're going to get all sorts of information from the Kubernetes side about, what's happening. And you'll also be able to reflect back on the things that you submitted, but we were particularly interested in the containers, right? And we had our message here was init, right? So this is telling us that there's something wrong in the init container area. And if we take a look at the image that we're trying to pull, it's Alpine latest, and the colon is missing. So we could fix it lots of ways. We could edit it with kubectl edit, or we could just pull the spec and modify it, and that would sort that out. I'm going to leave it like it is, though, and instead bounce back here and take you to the solution. So the solution says, hey, why don't you get pods? Because right out of the gate, right, if you run a pod and it says created, all that really means is that the spec looked good and was put in etcd. Now, I didn't demo kubectl describe, but that's an obvious choice as maybe your next step, because you're going to be able to get not only the highlights of the YAML that I dumped in full, but you're also going to be able to get the events that have occurred. This is nice because it gives you just the events for this resource, and that can be pretty useful. And you can see right here, hey, error image pull back off, right? So we had a failure to pull the image, and it spells it right out, right? So there's no question anymore once you use the events. And then, of course, if you wanted to just download that file with curl or wget and make the change so that we have the correct tag, like so, then you could reapply that and everything would be good. So that's an example of troubleshooting. It's the simplest first of the troubleshooting, but if you get a chance, you might want to play with BustaKube, and we take pull requests. So if you've got some really great examples of tricky problems and ways to solve them that are fast and easy, would love to have your contribution. And of course, we're always adding stuff to the BustaKube repo as well. So it'll be growing over time. Pod troubleshooting is just one of the things that you'll learn in the troubleshooting module from RxM. And I'm just going to go to rx-m.com, and then up under the courses option, you'll see custom course builder. And if we drop down here in the custom course builder, you'll see modules for various topics, and under Kubernetes down at the bottom is troubleshooting. And so you could drop that in and build your own custom class with stateful workloads and network policy and everything else you could possibly want in the Kubernetes lexicon. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody, and look forward to seeing you in the next Cloud Native Short Take.